The champagne flutes sparkled under the chandelier that New Year's Eve, nearing midnight. I was standing in my parents' living room in New York, my boyfriend Ethan's hand just barely trembling in mine. We'd been together 4 years, and he'd actually asked my parents for permission to propose that night, right in the middle of our annual family celebration. My heart was pounding, a wild drumbeat in my chest. I watched my father, Richard, set his drink down on the coffee table with this slow, deliberate motion. Before Ethan could even finish what I knew was a carefully rehearsed speech, my mother, Eleanor, cut in. Absolutely not. Her voice sliced through the festive buzz like a knife through silk. I blinked, utterly convinced I'd misheard her. What do you mean, not? Richard crossed his arms, his expression hardening into something I'd only ever seen directed at his business rivals, never at me. You heard your mother. This isn't happening. Ethan's grip tightened on my hand. He started, Sir, I love your daughter. I have a stable career as a software architect. I've saved for a down payment on a house, and Eleanor waved a dismissive hand, interrupting him again. This has nothing to do with you, young man. It's about family tradition. Order must be maintained. My older sister, Sophia, shifted uncomfortably on the sofa next to her husband, Owen. She'd gotten married 3 years prior in this incredibly elaborate ceremony my parents had funded completely. They'd given her a vintage Mercedes as a wedding gift, plus a massive check to furnish her new home. What tradition? I asked, my voice rising, surprised at its own volume. Sophia already got married. What does that have to do with Ethan and me? Richard stepped closer, his cologne suddenly overwhelming. You don't deserve to carry the family name forward. Your sister married first, as was proper. She understood her place, her value to this family. Those words landed like physical blows. I let go of Ethan's hand, stepping back, desperately searching my parents' faces for any sign they were joking, that this was some elaborate, cruel prank to make their eventual approval more dramatic. But their expressions were stone cold. My place? I repeated slowly. What are you even talking about? Eleanor smoothed her designer dress, looking at me with something that might have been pity. Darling, you've always been difficult, headstrong. You chose that ridiculous career in graphic design instead of joining your father's firm. You moved into that tiny apartment in Boston instead of staying here where we could properly guide you. I'm 28 years old, I said, my throat constricting. I have a career I love. I pay my own bills. I'm happy. Why would any of that disqualify me from getting married? Sophia finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Maybe we should talk about this privately. No, Richard snapped. She needs to understand this now. You don't get to make a spectacle of yourself with some proposal when you spent years rejecting everything this family stands for. Ethan moved next to me, his jaw clenched. With all due respect, Mr. Caldwell, your daughter is the most talented, compassionate person I've ever met. She volunteers at the community center. She's built an incredible portfolio. Enough, Eleanor said sharply. This discussion is over. The answer is no. I stood there, surrounded by the family I'd loved my entire life, and something fundamental cracked inside my chest. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked toward midnight. In living rooms all across New York, people were getting ready to kiss their loved ones, welcoming the new year with hope and champagne toasts. Why? I whispered. Richard's expression didn't soften. Because you don't deserve it. Those 5 words echoed in the sudden silence. Sophia looked away. Owen studied his shoes. My parents stared at me with matching expressions of cold certainty. Ethan's voice was gentle when he spoke. Let's go. I grabbed my coat from the hall closet, my hands shaking. As we reached the front door, Eleanor called out, You're making a mistake, walking away from your family like this. I turned back one last time. My family just told me I don't deserve happiness. I think the mistake was made long before tonight. The door clicked shut behind us with a decisive finality. Outside, the December air bit through my coat as fireworks began exploding overhead. Neighbors cheered from their porches, welcoming a new year with a joy I just couldn't access. Ethan wrapped his arm around my shoulders as I started to cry. "I'm so sorry," I sobbed against his jacket. I had no idea they would react like that. He kissed the top of my head. "This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault." We drove back to my apartment in silence, the city lights blurring through my tears. When we stumbled inside, I collapsed on the couch and just stared at the ceiling. Ethan brought me water and sat beside me, his presence steady and warm. "What do you want to do?" he asked quietly. I thought about all the family dinners, the holidays, the Sunday brunches where Eleanor had made subtle comments about my choices. How Sophia always got the better bedroom, the nicer gifts, the automatic approval for everything she attempted. How Richard had never attended a single one of my art shows, but had flown to Atlanta for Sophia's company presentations. "I want to build a life where I'm valued," I said finally. "Where someone doesn't have to earn the right to basic respect." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." The next morning, I drafted an email to my parents. Short, direct, final. I explained that I wouldn't be attending family functions anymore, that I needed distance from people who viewed me as less than. That they were welcome to contact me when they could apologize and treat me as an equal member of the family. Eleanor's response came within an hour: "You're being childish and dramatic. This is exactly the behavior we were talking about." I blocked their numbers that afternoon. Sophia tried calling 3 times before sending a text: "Please don't do this. They're just set in their ways. Give them time." I wrote back: "They told me I don't deserve to carry the family name. There's no timeline that makes that acceptable." She didn't respond. Ethan proposed properly 2 weeks later in the botanical gardens where we'd had our first date. I said yes with my whole heart, and we planned a small ceremony at Philadelphia City Hall with our closest friends. No family drama, no conditional approval, just 2 people choosing each other. My colleague, Olivia, stood as my witness. Ethan's best friend, Daniel, held the rings. The officiant spoke about partnership and mutual respect, and when Ethan slipped the simple gold band onto my finger, I felt lighter than I had in years. We honeymooned in Maine, staying in a bed and breakfast that overlooked snow-covered mountains. Ethan taught me to ski, laughing when I fell repeatedly before finally making it down a bunny slope. We drank hot chocolate by the fireplace and made plans for our future, plans that didn't include people who had to be convinced I had value. Back home, I threw myself into my work. The graphic design studio where I'd been employed for 6 years offered me a partnership. I accepted immediately, and within 18 months, our client list had doubled. I specialized in branding for small businesses, helping entrepreneurs visualize their dreams. Each successful project felt like proof that my choices had been valid all along. Ethan and I bought a modest house in a neighborhood with good schools and tree-lined streets. We adopted a rescue dog named Jasper and planted tomatoes in the backyard. Life became full in ways I hadn't anticipated. Dinner parties with friends who celebrated our successes. Weekend trips to farmers' markets. Quiet evenings reading on the porch while Jasper dozed at our feet. 3 years passed, then 5, then 7. I thought about my parents sometimes, usually during holidays or when I passed stores selling those world's best mom mugs. The hurt had faded into something more manageable, like a scar that only ached in certain weather. Sophia had sent a birth announcement when her first child arrived, and I'd mailed back a gift card with no return address. Ethan and I decided to try for children when I turned 35. It took longer than expected, required medical intervention that drained our savings, and tested our patience. But eventually, my doctor confirmed what the home test had already suggested: I was pregnant. Our daughter, Grace, arrived on a Tuesday morning in April. She had Ethan's dark hair and my stubborn chin, and from the moment they placed her in my arms, I understood a different kind of love, fierce and unconditional, and wholly unlike anything my parents had shown me. I took maternity leave from the design studio, and Ethan's company allowed him to work remotely. We stumbled through those first exhausting months together, learning Grace's different cries and celebrating each small milestone. When she smiled at 6 weeks old, we took approximately 300 photos. The design studio thrived beyond my expectations. My partner, Liam, suggested we expand into web design, and within a year, we hired 3 developers and a content strategist. I specialized in brand identity while Liam handled the technical aspects, and our complementary skills created something neither of us could have achieved alone. One Thursday afternoon, a woman named Isabel walked into our studio with a dream of opening a chain of bookstores focused on independent authors. She had financing, locations scouted, and zero visual identity. I spent 3 weeks developing concepts, presenting mood boards that captured the intersection of traditional literary culture and modern accessibility. When Isabel saw the final brand package, she cried. "This is exactly what lived in my head, but I couldn't articulate," she said, gripping my hands. "You saw my vision and made it real." Those moments made every rejection from my parents feel insignificant. I was building something meaningful, helping people realize their dreams through visual storytelling. The validation came from work well done, from clients whose businesses flourished partly because of the foundations we built together. Ethan and I settled into parenthood with Grace like sailors learning to navigate unfamiliar waters. The sleepless nights tested us, but we developed rhythms and systems. He handled the midnight feedings while I took the early morning ones. We traded off weekend duties so each of us got time to pursue individual interests. My friendship with Olivia deepened during this period. She'd been my colleague for years, but motherhood created new bonds. We met for coffee while Grace and her son, Thomas, played at the indoor playground. She listened without judgment when I admitted how hard I found certain aspects of parenting, how some days I missed the freedom of my pre-child life. "Everyone feels that way sometimes," she assured me. "It doesn't make you a bad mother. It makes you honest." That honesty extended to how I processed my estrangement from my parents. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Evans who specialized in family trauma. She helped me understand that cutting off contact didn't make me vindictive or cruel. It made me someone who valued her mental health enough to enforce boundaries. "You're not obligated to maintain relationships that harm you," Dr. Evans said during one session. "Biology creates connection, but it doesn't mandate tolerance of abuse." I worked through layers of grief in her office. Grief for the parents I'd wanted but never had. Grief for a childhood marked by conditional affection and constant comparison. Grief for the family holidays that would never include my daughter because my parents had chosen pride over love. But alongside the grief came liberation. Each session peeled away another layer of misplaced guilt. I hadn't failed my parents. They'd failed me. That realization, simple as it seemed, changed everything. I stopped wondering if I should have tried harder, been different, somehow earned a love they'd reserved for Sophia. Grace's second birthday arrived with a small party in our backyard. I'd invited neighborhood families, Olivia and her kids, and Ethan's parents, Susan and Michael, who'd flown in from Colorado. Susan had become the grandmother I'd never had, warm, supportive, endlessly patient with Grace's toddler antics. "She has your determination," Susan observed as Grace insisted on opening presents by herself, refusing all assistance. "That's what my parents hated most about me," I said before I could stop myself. Susan sat down her cake plate and looked at me directly. "Then they were fools who missed out on knowing an extraordinary woman." Those simple words, spoken with such conviction, made tears spring to my eyes. This was what parental love looked like: unconditional support, celebration of strengths, presence without agenda. The studio landed a contract with a nonprofit focused on literacy programs. The pay was minimal, but the mission resonated deeply. I volunteered additional hours designing materials for their fundraising campaigns, creating visuals that told stories of transformed lives through reading access. The executive director, David, became a friend. He'd grown up in poverty, found salvation in a library that stayed open late, and dedicated his adult life to ensuring other kids had similar opportunities. His passion was infectious, and I found myself on the nonprofit's board within 2 years. "You have a gift for making abstract concepts tangible," David told me after a particularly successful fundraising gala. "These materials don't just look beautiful, they make people feel the importance of our work." I thought about how my parents had dismissed graphic design as a ridiculous career, how they'd wanted me to join Richard's financial firm, pushing numbers and making wealthy people wealthier. Instead, I was helping organizations change lives, creating visual languages that communicated hope and possibility. Ethan's career flourished alongside mine. His firm promoted him to lead architect on a major civic center project. He came home energized by the challenges, sketching ideas at the kitchen table while Grace colored beside him. She'd inherited his spatial reasoning, building elaborate block towers that defied toddler engineering expectations. We talked about having another child, weighing the logistics against our desires. The pregnancy with Grace had been difficult, and my doctor warned that future pregnancies might pose similar challenges. But when I held friends' newborns, felt their tiny weight and new person smell, longing overwhelmed practical concerns. "Let's try," I told Ethan one night after Grace had finally fallen asleep following an epic bedtime battle. "I want her to have a sibling, someone who will be there long after we're gone." He kissed me softly. "Then let's try." The fertility journey the second time around was harder. Months passed without success. My doctor recommended a specialist, and we entered the world of ovulation tracking, timed intimacy, and mounting medical bills. Each negative test felt like another failure, another thing my body couldn't accomplish. Dr. Evans helped me navigate the emotional turbulence. "Your worth isn't determined by your reproductive capacity," she reminded me during a particularly difficult session. "You're already a mother. You're already enough." But the wanting persisted, a dull ache that accompanied every baby announcement from friends and colleagues. I was happy for them while simultaneously grieving my own struggles. The duality exhausted me. Grace turned 3, then 4. She started preschool at a Montessori program that emphasized independence and creativity. Her teachers praised her problem-solving skills and her ability to include other children in her play. Parent-teacher conferences became celebrations of her development rather than recitations of concerns. "She's got a strong sense of justice," her lead teacher, Miss Caroline, observed. Yesterday, she noticed another student didn't have snacks and shared hers without being asked. When I praised her, she said it wasn't fair for someone to be hungry. I recognized my younger self in that response, the child who'd noticed inequity and spoken up, who'd questioned why fairness seemed negotiable. But unlike my parents, I nurtured that trait in Grace, encouraged her to advocate for herself and others, taught her that kindness was strength, not weakness. The studio celebrated its 10th anniversary with a client appreciation event. We'd grown from that initial partnership to a team of 15 employees. Young designers I'd mentored were landing their own major accounts, developing styles that pushed our collective work in exciting directions. Liam gave a speech crediting our success to taking chances on people and projects that mattered. He looked at me when he said it, acknowledging the nonprofit work that had raised our profile while draining our profit margins. But that work had attracted clients who valued purpose alongside profit and ultimately made us more successful than we dreamed. I was 37 when the fertility specialist suggested IVF as our best option for a second child. The procedure was expensive, invasive, and emotionally grueling. Ethan and I discussed it extensively, weighing whether we could handle another potential disappointment. "I'm in if you're in," he said finally. "But I need you to know that our family is complete with just Grace if this doesn't work. She's enough. You're enough. We're enough." We moved forward with one round of IVF, agreeing it would be our final attempt. The 2-week wait after the embryo transfer was torture. I analyzed every twinge, every moment of nausea, looking for signs that might mean nothing. The positive pregnancy test arrived on a random Tuesday morning. I stared at the two lines for several minutes before waking Ethan. He cried when I showed him, pulling me into an embrace that conveyed relief and joy and exhaustion from the journey. Grace was 5 years old and Leo was 8 months old when my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe to accept. "Is this Mrs. Patterson?" a woman's professional voice asked. "Yes, this is she. This is Metropolitan Hospital calling. Your father, Richard Caldwell, was admitted this morning with a severe heart attack. He's listed you as his emergency contact. His condition is critical." The room tilted sideways. I sat down hard on the kitchen floor while Ethan looked up from where he was building blocks with Grace. We haven't spoken in almost 8 years, I managed. "I understand this might be unexpected," the nurse said gently. "But he's requesting to see you." I ended the call and stared at my phone. Ethan came over and sat beside me, Grace balanced on his hip. "What happened?" he asked. I explained about Richard's heart attack, about being listed as an emergency contact despite our years of silence. Ethan listened carefully, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Do you want to go?" Did I? Part of me wanted to delete the number and pretend the call never happened. The man who told me I didn't deserve happiness now needed something from me. But another part, smaller and more insistent, remembered being 7 years old and Richard teaching me to ride a bike. Remembered him reading bedtime stories with different voices for each character. "I think I have to," I said quietly. Ethan nodded. "Then we'll go together." We arranged for Olivia to watch Grace and Leo and drove to Metropolitan Hospital in intense silence. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and cafeteria food. A nurse directed us to the cardiac intensive care unit where machines beeped in steady rhythms. Richard looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the hospital bed and monitors. Eleanor sat in a chair beside him, her makeup perfect despite the early hour. She stood when we entered, her expression cycling through surprise and something else I couldn't identify. "You came," she said. "The hospital called." I stayed near the door, Ethan's hand warm against my back. Richard's eyes opened. His voice came out raspy and weak. "I need to talk to you alone." Eleanor's mouth tightened, but she gathered her purse and left without argument. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving us in artificial silence broken only by medical equipment. I approached the bed slowly. "What did you want to say?" Richard struggled to sit up slightly, wincing with the effort. "I'm dying. The doctors are optimistic, but I can feel it. This is the end." "I'm sorry you're going through this," I said carefully. He shook his head, the movement causing monitors to spike briefly. "Don't be polite. I don't deserve it." He paused, breathing labored. "You were right to cut us off. I was cruel that New Year's Eve. Unforgivably cruel." The apology landed strangely after so many years. I waited for him to continue. "There's something you need to know," Richard said. "Something Eleanor and I decided when you were born. A decision that shaped everything that came after." Dread pulled cold in my stomach. "What decision?" He closed his eyes and for a moment I thought he'd lost consciousness. Then he spoke again, each word deliberate and heavy. "Sophia isn't your sister. Not biologically. We adopted her when your mother and I struggled with infertility. Spent years trying to conceive. And eventually we made peace with having one child. We poured everything into Sophia. Every hope, every expectation, every dream we had about family." I gripped the bed rail, my knees threatening to buckle. "Then, impossibly, your mother got pregnant with you. The doctors called it a miracle. But to us," his voice cracked, "to us, it felt like a complication. We'd already built our family around Sophia, already established her as our legacy, our future. And then you came along and disrupted that narrative. Why are you telling me this?" I whispered. Richard's eyes opened, meeting mine directly. Because you deserve to know why we treated you the way we did. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. But we convinced ourselves that Sophia was our real daughter, the one we'd chosen. You were the unexpected addition that we resented for making our family complicated. The machines beeped steadily as I processed his words. Years of subtle preferences, of being second choice, of watching Sophia receive automatic approval suddenly had context. The night of your proposal, Richard continued, I was terrified. Terrified that if you got married, had children, built a successful life, it would prove we'd been wrong about you. That you'd become everything we'd reserved for Sophia, and we'd have to confront our own cruelty. So, you told me I didn't deserve happiness, I said flatly. I told you that because I was a coward who couldn't admit I'd failed you as a father. Tears tracked down his weathered face. I kept you alive because biology demanded it. But I never let you be my daughter. And that shame has eaten at me every day since you walked out that door. I stepped back from the bed, my chest tight with competing emotions, anger at the confession, grief for the childhood I deserved but never received, and a strange sense of validation that my instincts had been correct all along. Does Sophia know? I asked. About being adopted? Yes, we told her when she turned 18. About how we treated you because of it? No. And Mom? She's known all along. We made every decision together. The door opened and Eleanor entered hesitantly. She looked between us, reading the tension accurately. You told her, she said to Richard. She deserved the truth, he replied weakly. Eleanor turned to me, her composure cracking slightly. I won't ask for forgiveness. What we did was inexcusable, but your father is right. We let our own insecurities and twisted priorities poison your childhood. You were innocent, and we punished you for existing. I stood there in that sterile hospital room, looking at the two people who had given me life but withheld love. Part of me wanted to scream at them, to detail every moment their favoritism had cut deep. But mostly, I felt tired. I have a daughter, I said quietly. Grace is 14 months old. She has Ethan's eyes and my determination, and when I look at her, I can't imagine ever making her feel less than. The thought of treating her as an afterthought or complication makes me physically ill. Eleanor's face crumpled. You're a mother. I am. And being her mother has taught me that love isn't finite. That you don't run out of affection or approval just because you have more than one child. I looked at Richard, his monitors still beeping their steady rhythm. Whatever you're asking for now, whether it's absolution or reconciliation, I can't give you. The damage is too deep. I'm not asking for anything, Richard said. Just telling you the truth so you can move forward knowing it wasn't your fault. Nothing you did or didn't do caused our treatment. The failure was entirely ours. Ethan appeared in the doorway, giving me a questioning look. I nodded slightly, and he entered, standing beside me with quiet support. This is Ethan, I said. My husband. The man you rejected without bothering to know. Richard had the grace to look ashamed. I'm sorry. Apologize to him, not me. Richard turned his gaze to Ethan. I judged you unfairly. You were trying to build a life with someone I'd already decided didn't matter. That failure of character is mine to own. Ethan's jaw worked briefly before he spoke. I appreciate you saying that, but I need you to understand something. Your daughter is the strongest person I know. She built a life filled with love and success despite your rejection. She didn't need your approval to become remarkable. Eleanor made a small sound halfway between a sob and a gasp. We should go, I said, suddenly desperate for fresh air and distance. I hope you recover, Richard. I genuinely do. But this doesn't change anything between us. We left before either parent could respond, navigating the maze of hospital corridors back to the parking lot. The afternoon sun felt startling after the fluorescent lighting. I breathed deeply, trying to ground myself in the present. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked once we were in the car. "I don't know," I admitted. They essentially confirmed that everything I felt growing up was real, that I wasn't imagining the favoritism or making up the distance. But having that validation doesn't make it hurt less. He started the engine, but didn't pull out of the parking space immediately. "What do you want to do?" I thought about Grace waiting at home, probably covered in pureed sweet potato and joy. About the design studio where tomorrow I'd meet with a new client excited about launching her bakery. About the life Ethan and I had built brick by brick without my parents' blessing or support. "I want to go home," I said. "I want to hug our daughter and remember that family isn't just biology or obligation. It's the people who choose to show up, who celebrate your existence instead of resenting it." Ethan pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward our neighborhood. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "Mom called. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for several blocks before responding, "Not yet. Maybe not ever. I need time to process." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. "Finally, I understand. I'm sorry for everything. Richard survived the heart attack, though his recovery was slow. Eleanor called once, 2 weeks later, to update me on his progress. I listened politely and thanked her for the information, but didn't visit again. Sophia sent a longer message eventually, explaining that she'd always known she was adopted but hadn't realized how differently our parents had treated us. She claimed she'd thought the favoritism was normal sibling rivalry. The message ended with an invitation to meet for coffee. I let it sit in my inbox for a month before responding with a careful decline. Maybe someday I'd be ready to rebuild something with Sophia. But the foundation of our relationship had been built on unequal ground, and I needed time to determine if repair was even possible. Leo's arrival transformed our family dynamic completely. Grace took her role as big sister seriously, insisting on helping with diaper changes and singing to him when he cried. Ethan and I were older, more exhausted, but also more confident. We knew which battles mattered and which didn't, trusted our instincts instead of constantly second-guessing ourselves. The sleepless nights were brutal, but they carried different weight than they had with Grace. I understood now that this phase would pass. That eventually Leo would sleep through the night and the fog of exhaustion would lift. That perspective made the difficult moments more bearable. My maternity leave lasted 3 months before I returned to the studio part-time. Liam had hired an associate creative director who'd kept projects moving smoothly in my absence. Coming back felt like slipping into a favorite coat, familiar, comfortable, exactly right. I pumped milk in my office between client meetings, balancing conference calls with feeding schedules. Some days the juggling act felt impossible, but Olivia reminded me that I didn't have to be perfect. "You just have to be present," she said. "That's all kids really need." Grace started kindergarten the same month Leo turned 6 months old. The school had excellent teachers and a robust arts program. She came home bursting with stories about new friends and projects. Her artwork covered our refrigerator, gradually replacing the professional photos we'd carefully curated. One evening, she asked why she didn't have grandparents like her friend Oliver. He brought his grandmother for show and tell, and Grace had noticed the absence in her own life. "Sometimes families are complicated," I explained, choosing my words carefully. "My parents and I don't see each other because they weren't very kind to me when I was younger." Her little face scrunched with confusion. "But grandparents are supposed to love you." "They are," I agreed. "And you have Grandma Susan and Grandpa Michael who love you very much. Sometimes family is the people who show up and care about us, not just the people we're related to." She seemed to accept this, returning to her coloring book, but the conversation stayed with me for days. Grace would grow up without knowing her maternal grandparents, without the full extended family I'd once imagined. That loss felt real, even though I didn't regret the choices that led to it. The design studio continued expanding. We moved to a larger office space with room for workshops and collaborative areas. I taught occasional classes on brand development, enjoying the opportunity to share knowledge with emerging designers. Several students mentioned that my approach, emphasizing storytelling and emotional connection, differed from their formal training focus on technical execution. Design isn't just about making things look good, I told one class. It's about communication. Every color choice, every font selection, every spatial decision tells part of a story. Your job is ensuring that story aligns with what your client needs to say. A young designer named Sophia approached me after class with a portfolio full of potential. She'd grown up in a small town where creative careers seemed impossible, but she taught herself design software and developed a distinctive style. I hired her as an intern, and within a year she was leading projects for major clients. "You gave me a chance when nobody else would," she told me during her annual review. "You did the work," I corrected. "I just recognized what was already there." But I knew what her words really meant. Someone had seen her value when others overlooked it. Someone had invested in her potential without demanding she prove herself first. I'd offered the kind of unconditional support I'd never received from my own parents. Leo grew from infant to toddler with remarkable speed. He was quieter than Grace had been, more observant. He'd sit for long periods watching ants cross the sidewalk or leaves flutter in the breeze. Ethan joked that we'd produced an engineer and a philosopher, two extremes that somehow balanced each other perfectly. Grace's relationship with her brother evolved from protective to collaborative. They built elaborate pretend worlds together, incorporating stuffed animals and blocks into complex narratives. Listening to their play, hearing the kindness and creativity they brought to interactions, I felt profound gratitude that they'd never know the conditional affection I'd experienced. The nonprofit work expanded when David approached me about joining a collaborative project with 3 other organizations. They wanted to create a comprehensive resource hub for underserved communities, combining literacy programs, job training, and small business development. The scope was massive, requiring visual branding that could encompass multiple services while maintaining cohesive identity. I assembled a team of 5 designers, and we spent 3 months developing the brand architecture. The work was challenging and often frustrating, but seeing the completed materials displayed at the launch event made every late night worthwhile. We created something that would tangibly improve people's lives. Ethan's Civic Center project reached completion around the same time. The building was beautiful, all clean lines and natural light, designed to welcome rather than intimidate. At the opening ceremony, the mayor gave a speech about accessible public spaces and community pride. Ethan stood beside his team, humbled despite his central role in the success. "You're amazing," I told him that night after we'd returned home and relieved Olivia from babysitting duty. He pulled me close, resting his chin on my head. "We make a pretty good team. Both of us building things that matter." That simple observation captured what we created together. A partnership built on mutual respect and shared values. We celebrated each other's successes without competition or jealousy. We parented as equals, dividing responsibilities based on capability and availability rather than traditional gender expectations. We built exactly the kind of relationship my parents had tried to convince me I didn't deserve. Life continued moving forward. Grace grew into a curious child who asked endless questions and made us laugh daily. The design studio landed a major contract with a restaurant chain, expanding our team and reputation. Ethan got promoted to senior architect at his firm. We bought a bigger house with an actual yard and a spare room for the second child we hoped to have. I joined the local business association and mentored young designers looking to start their own studios. Our circle of friends expanded to include other parents from Grace's preschool and neighbors who shared our values. On what would have been our 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised me with a weekend trip to the same main bed and breakfast where we'd honeymooned. Grace and Leo stayed with Olivia, who spoiled them outrageously with ice cream and park visits. We skied again, both significantly better than our first attempt. Drank hot chocolate by the same fireplace. Made love in a room overlooking mountains that remained unchanged despite everything that had shifted in our lives. Do you have any regrets? Ethan asked one night, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my arm. I considered the question seriously. I regret that my parents couldn't be who I needed. I regret that Grace and Leo won't have grandparents on my side who show up with unconditional love. But I don't regret walking away. That choice saved me. He kissed my forehead. You saved yourself. I just got to be part of the journey. We returned home to Grace's squealing excitement and Jasper's ecstatic tail wagging. The house smelled like the cookies Olivia had helped Grace bake. Our life felt full in ways my younger self couldn't have imagined during that devastating New Year's Eve. Richard passed away 2 years after his heart attack. Eleanor called to inform me, her voice hollow with grief. I attended the funeral, sitting in the back row with Ethan beside me. Sophia delivered a eulogy about a devoted father, and I listened to her describe a man I'd never really known. At the reception afterward, distant relatives asked about my life with genuine interest. I showed pictures of Grace and our son, Leo, who had arrived 6 months prior. Talked about the studio's recent expansion and Ethan's work. They seemed surprised by my success, as though Richard and Eleanor had painted a different picture entirely. Eleanor approached as I prepared to leave, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. I came for closure, I replied honestly. Not for him, but for myself. I left the reception without looking back. Ethan's hands were steady in mine. We drove home to our children, to the life we built with intention and love. The life my parents had tried to convince me I didn't deserve. Grace was 5 now, old enough to ask questions about family trees and grandparents. I told her age-appropriate truths about distance and difficult relationships. Emphasized that families came in all configurations, and what mattered most was mutual respect and kindness. Do your parents not like you? She asked once, with a child's blunt curiosity. They didn't know how to love me the way I deserved, I explained. So, I found people who did, like Daddy and Olivia and all our friends who celebrate us. She seemed satisfied with this answer, returning to her coloring book without further questions. Leo grew from infant to toddler, hitting milestones that filled our house with joy. I photographed everything, building albums full of memories and proof that love could be unconditional, that children deserve to know they are valued simply for existing. The design studio celebrated its 15th anniversary. We'd grown from a small team of 4 to a respected firm of 22 employees. I gave a speech at the celebration about taking risks and believing in yourself even when others doubt you. Several young designers approached afterward, thanking me for the inspiration. Sophia reached out again when Grace turned 7, asking if her children could meet their cousin. I agreed to a supervised playdate at a neutral park. Watching our kids play together while Sophia and I made awkward small talk felt surreal. I'm sorry I didn't protect you, she said as our daughters went down the slide together. I was a kid, too. But I benefited from their favoritism without questioning it. You were a child, I acknowledged. But you're an adult now, and you stayed silent when it mattered. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. How wrong everything was. We didn't become close after that meeting, but we maintained civil contact for our children's sake. Grace enjoyed having a cousin, and I wasn't going to punish her for my parents' failures. But I kept firm boundaries, ensuring Sophia understood that our relationship existed on my terms. Eleanor declined rapidly after Richard's death. Grief and age combined to diminish her. She moved to an assisted living facility, and Sophia managed her care. I sent flowers on her birthday, but didn't visit. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. On Grace's 8th birthday, we threw a party in our backyard. 20 children ran shrieking through sprinklers while parents chatted over lemonade and cake. Ethan and I stood on the porch watching the chaos with matching smiles. You did it, he said softly. Built exactly the family you wanted. I leaned against him, content in ways that transcended simple happiness. We did it together. Grace's laughter rang out as she chased Leo through the yard, both of them soaked and delighted. Friends surrounded us, people who'd chosen to be part of our lives without reservation or condition. The house we filled with love and intention stood solid behind us. My parents had been wrong about everything that mattered. I did deserve to carry a name forward, just not theirs. I deserved happiness, partnership, success, and children who knew they were treasured. I deserved a life built on respect rather than obligation. And I claimed all of it without their permission or blessing. The sun set slowly over our celebration, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Children played until exhaustion claimed them. Adults lingered over coffee and conversation. Our home pulsed with life and warmth. Richard had kept me alive out of obligation, but I'd learned to truly live despite him. That knowledge settled into my bones like truth finally acknowledged. I was enough. I had always been enough. And the family I created proved it every single day. Years later, when people asked about my parents, I told them the simple truth: we weren't close. Most didn't pry further, respecting the boundary implicit in my tone. Those who knew the full story marveled at my resilience, but I never felt particularly resilient. I'd simply refused to accept someone else's limited vision of my worth. Refused to shrink myself to fit their narrow expectations. Refused to believe that biological connection automatically warranted love or loyalty. My revenge was living well. Building a life so full of genuine love and accomplishment that their rejection became irrelevant. Raising children who never questioned whether they deserved happiness. Creating a legacy of kindness and mutual respect that stood in stark contrast to the conditional affection I'd received. On New Year's Eve, almost 15 years after that devastating rejection, Ethan and I stood on our porch, watching fireworks explode over the neighborhood. Grace and Leo slept soundly upstairs, exhausted from the party we'd hosted for friends. Jasper dozed at our feet, old now but still devoted. "Happy New Year," Ethan said, pulling me close as the clock struck midnight. "Happy New Year," I replied, kissing him as explosions of color lit the sky. The years ahead would bring new challenges and joys. But standing there with Ethan, in the home we'd built and the life we'd chosen, I felt profound gratitude. My parents had tried to convince me I wasn't worthy of this happiness. I'd spent 15 years proving them spectacularly wrong. And looking back, would I change any of it?